For years, I believed our marriage was the epitome of harmony. Every day began with a comforting ritual that made me feel as if I were living in a perpetual sunrise of happiness. Mornings were our sacred time. Emma and I would sit together at the small kitchen table, sharing steaming cups of freshly brewed coffee as the early light spilled through the window. I remember the way her eyes sparkled with quiet contentment as she talked about her plans for the day, and how the soft hum of our conversation blended perfectly with the chirping of birds outside. In those moments, I was convinced that our love was unshakable. Our evenings held their own magic, filled with candlelit dinners that we prepared side by side. I cherished the way the flickering light danced across Emma's face as she smiled and recounted stories from her day. We would discuss our dreams and aspirations, our words floating like gentle whispers in the dim glow. There was an intimacy in these moments that, to me, was the very foundation of our connection. I believed that the warmth of her affection and the tenderness in her voice spoke of a deep, passionate love, a love that should have set our hearts ablaze. Weekends were a time of escape, when we left behind the daily grind to retreat to quiet getaways in the countryside. Driving along winding roads with the windows down, the world seemed to transform into a picturesque backdrop for our love story. We would explore hidden trails, have long walks under the vast sky, and later, cuddle up together as the stars emerged overhead. Each getaway felt like a reaffirmation of our bond, a promise that no matter what life threw our way, we had each other. Yet, as much as I adored these moments, there was always an undercurrent of something elusive when it came to our physical intimacy. Emma was undeniably warm, caring, and endlessly supportive, but when we moved beyond gentle affection, I noticed a persistent absence of the passionate spark I assumed every couple shared. In the quiet hours after our candlelit dinners, as I reached for her hand or tried to steal a kiss, I sometimes caught a fleeting look in her eyes, a hint of distant resignation that I dismissed as fatigue or a momentary distraction. I reassured myself that our love was not solely defined by physical passion, and I clung to the belief that our connection was strong enough to transcend mere desire. I trusted Emma implicitly. Her soft smiles and kind gestures always made me feel that she was completely devoted to our marriage. I attributed any fleeting moments of distance to the inevitable ebb and flow of life's rhythms, a busy schedule, a long day at work, or simply the natural variation in human emotions. I never imagined that behind her tender expressions lay a secret so carefully guarded that it would one day shatter the very illusion I held dear. In retrospect, the little inconsistencies now seem like subtle signs of a truth I was too blissfully unaware to see. But in those golden days, every laugh, every shared secret, and every peaceful moment reinforced my belief that we had built something perfect. I reveled in the belief that our life together was a flawless tapestry of love and joy, woven from threads of trust and devotion. I was content, convinced that nothing could ever disrupt the serene perfection of our shared existence. And so, I continued to bask in the warmth of our perfect illusion, unaware of the secret that lay dormant beneath Emma's gentle smiles. Over time, the tiniest details began to pile up like subtle brushstrokes on a canvas, slowly painting a picture that I couldn't ignore. It started innocuously enough. Emma would frequently cancel our plans for a me-time night without offering any clear explanation. At first, I assumed it was merely her way of recharging after a long day, something completely ordinary. But as the weeks passed, the cancellations became a regular occurrence, each one leaving behind a lingering uncertainty. I began to notice an unsettling pattern whenever I attempted to initiate intimacy. There were moments when a gentle touch or a loving glance would be met with an abrupt change of subject, or she would simply turn her attention to something else entirely. It wasn't that she was angry or unkind, it was as if she were mentally retreating behind an invisible wall whenever the topic of physical closeness arose. I tried to dismiss it, convincing myself that every relationship has its ups and downs, that perhaps we were simply going through a temporary lull. Yet, deep down, a small seed of doubt began to sprout. Social gatherings, once a source of shared joy, now took on a peculiar tension. I noticed that whenever our friends started discussing passionate relationships or engaging in playful flirtation, Emma's expression would subtly darken. There was a moment, a fleeting glimpse of discomfort, as if those conversations were like a mirror reflecting something she desperately wanted to hide. I found myself leaning in a little closer, catching her off-guard sighs and the way her eyes darted away from the topic. Then, there were the late-night phone calls. Initially, they seemed innocent, work-related calls that stretched into the early hours of the morning. But gradually, I began to count them, and their frequency became impossible to ignore. Each time her phone buzzed, she would quietly excuse herself, stepping into another room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. When I gently inquired, she would reassure me that it was nothing more than urgent work business. Yet, the tone of her voice often betrayed a subtle tension, a reluctance that I couldn't quite place. I started to feel a quiet dissonance growing within me, a persistent whisper of doubt that something was amiss. Every cancelled plan, every evasive response, and every furtive glance chipped away at the foundation of the physical connection I had so long craved. I questioned whether the intimacy we once celebrated had ever been genuine or if it was just an elaborate performance to maintain the facade of a perfect marriage. Despite these mounting concerns, I clung desperately to hope. I told myself that this was merely a rough patch, a temporary phase that every long-term relationship inevitably encounters. I immersed myself in the memories of our happier times, trying to convince myself that Emma's recent behavior was a deviation from our true selves. I replayed our shared laughter over coffee, our long talks during quiet evenings, and the tenderness in her eyes during moments of vulnerability. I believed that love, in its infinite capacity to endure, would eventually mend these fissures. But as the days turned into weeks, the inconsistencies became harder to ignore. Each time I reached out for the closeness I longed for, I was met with silence or a polite diversion, and each time a phone call interrupted our evening, my heart would sink just a little more. I began to wonder if our marriage was built on a foundation of unspoken truths, and whether the connection I had always believed to be mutual was, in fact, just one-sided. With every subtle hint, my doubts grew louder, echoing in the quiet corners of my mind, and I was left standing at the edge of a chasm I never knew existed. That rainy evening felt like the world itself was mourning with me. After a particularly strained dinner, where the clink of cutlery and polite smiles barely masked the weight of unspoken words, Emma and I found ourselves alone in our dimly lit living room. The steady patter of raindrops on the window pane set a somber rhythm, echoing the turmoil that churned within me. I sat on the worn, familiar sofa, feeling a palpable tension that neither of us could ignore. Emma's eyes, usually so warm and assuring, now held a vulnerability I had never seen before. She fidgeted with the loose thread on her sweater, her fingers trembling as if betraying the depth of her inner conflict. For a long, heavy moment, silence hung between us, thick and suffocating, until finally, with a voice barely above a whisper, she began to speak. "I've always felt disconnected from the idea of sexual intimacy," she confessed, her words trembling in the quiet room. I felt as though time itself had slowed to a crawl. The admission hit me like a bolt of lightning, a truth so profound and unexpected that I struggled to catch my breath. "I've never been drawn to it, not the way you are," she continued, her voice wavering as unshed tears shimmered in her eyes. In that raw, unguarded moment, every illusion I had clung to began to crumble. A storm of emotions overwhelmed me, betrayal surged like a tidal wave, confusion clouded my thoughts, and an aching sense of loss took root deep within my heart. Every cherished memory, the tender kisses, the passionate embraces, the whispered promises of forever, now felt tainted by the revelation that the physical union we celebrated might have been nothing more than a carefully constructed facade. I sat there, stunned and struggling to comprehend the magnitude of her confession. Emma, the woman I had loved and trusted implicitly, had concealed a part of herself that was fundamental to her identity. She admitted that she was asexual, a truth she had guarded desperately for years out of fear that revealing it would shatter the life we had built together. The realization that our intimacy was one-sided, the result of societal expectations rather than genuine mutual desire, left me reeling. The living room, with its soft lamplight and gentle shadows, suddenly felt alien and unwelcoming. I wrestled internally with the flood of thoughts, Had I misinterpreted every touch, every loving gesture, simply because I desperately needed a certain kind of passion? Was I clinging to an ideal that was never truly shared? As I processed her words, the foundation of our marriage seemed to shake beneath me. I felt betrayed not by a deliberate act of deception, but by the slow, creeping concealment of a truth that defined who she was. The physical connection I had assumed was the beating heart of our relationship was, in fact, an illusion, one that had masked a reality I wasn't prepared to face. Amidst the rhythmic sound of rain and the quiet sobs that threatened to escape, I realized that this confession marked a turning point. The comfortable, predictable life I thought I knew was now in question. In that somber, rain-soaked moment, I was forced to confront the painful truth that the intimacy we once celebrated was built on a lie meant to preserve appearances rather than honor our authentic selves. In the days following Emma's revelation, the quiet tension that had been simmering between us erupted into a storm of internal conflict. I woke up each morning feeling more divided than the last, on one side, a deep-seated need for emotional and physical connection, and on the other, the stark reality of our intimacy, or the lack thereof. Every touch, every whispered word, now carried the weight of a painful secret that I could no longer ignore. The life I thought I knew, the gentle mornings, the warm, flickering lights of our evenings, had shattered into fragments of unmet desires and unspoken resentments. One chilly evening, as the rain softly tapped against our window, I could no longer hide behind the veneer of normalcy. Emma and I sat at our dining table, its surface cluttered with remnants of a half-finished meal, symbolic of the fractured state of our relationship. The silence was deafening until, with a voice heavy with raw despair, I finally spoke. "Emma, I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and anger. "I need a marriage where I feel whole, where I feel seen and loved, physically and emotionally." The words, once freed from the confines of my guarded heart, felt like both a confession and a breaking point. For a long, agonizing moment, she simply looked at me. In her eyes, I saw a mixture of pain and resolute determination. "Divorce isn't the answer," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. "Our marriage is worth salvaging, even if it means redefining what we expect from each other." I was stunned. My call for divorce, born from a place of deep-seated hurt and betrayal, was met with a refusal that left me reeling. Emma went on, her tone earnest and imploring, "Love isn't solely about physicality. We've built a life together that is far more than what happens behind closed doors. I know I've struggled with intimacy, but that doesn't mean we have to give up on everything we've shared." Her words struck a discordant chord within me. On one hand, I yearned for a traditional partnership, one where the physical connection was as vibrant as the emotional bond. On the other, I couldn't shake the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a middle ground, a way to honor the life we'd built without sacrificing my deepest needs. The raw vulnerability in Emma's eyes made me pause, questioning whether my longing for the lost spark was worth the total dismantling of the only family I had ever known. That night, I lay awake in the dark, torn between the bitter taste of betrayal and the echo of her plea. Every memory of our past, of shared laughter, quiet nights, and tender moments, clashed violently with the undeniable truth that our intimacy had always been an illusion. I could feel my heart splintering with each thought, each lingering doubt. I knew that moving forward would require a decision that could either redefine our future or mark the end of everything we had built together. In that silent, painful struggle, I realized that the road ahead would not be easy. I stood at the crossroads of despair and hope, uncertain if I could ever reconcile the yearning for a traditional partnership with the reality of a life built on hidden truths. Not long after our heated confrontation, the silence between Emma and me shattered once again when she surprised me with a proposal so bewildering it felt almost unreal. I had barely begun to process the raw emotions of that night when, one quiet afternoon, Emma approached me with a measured tone that belied the desperation in her eyes. "Maybe we can try something different," she said softly, almost as if discussing a mundane grocery list. I listened, my heart pounding, as she carefully revealed an unconventional idea. She explained that, in her search for a solution to our impasse, she had spoken with her best friend, Lisa, a person I had known only in the context of friendly gatherings and shared confidences. To my utter shock, Emma confided that Lisa had expressed interest in becoming involved with me. "Maybe Lisa can help fill the void," she murmured, her words hanging in the air like an absurd yet desperate lifeline. For a long moment, I sat frozen, the gravity of her suggestion settling over me. My mind raced with conflicting emotions, intrigue at the possibility of finally addressing my unmet sexual needs, a deep-seated apprehension about the potential consequences, and a simmering resentment that I was now expected to accept a radical alteration of our intimate life. I had always imagined our marriage as a private sanctuary, a space where our shared love was nurtured between just the two of us. The idea of inviting a third person into that intimate sphere not only challenged my preconceptions but also threatened to rewrite the very fabric of our union. In that moment, the room seemed to constrict around me as I weighed the proposal. I recalled our recent confrontations, the flood of emotions, betrayal, confusion, and heartache that had led us to this precipice. My thoughts were a whirlwind of doubts. Could Lisa's involvement truly mend the chasm between us, or would it only deepen the rift? Was this a genuine attempt by Emma to salvage our marriage, or was it a last-ditch effort to preserve the life she had built on a foundation of secrecy? I searched Emma's eyes, looking for a hint of certainty, but all I found was vulnerability and a plea for compromise. Emma continued, her voice quivering as she explained that she had believed this arrangement might allow us both to meet our needs without forcing either of us to change who we fundamentally were. She spoke of the possibility that Lisa's involvement could be structured and respectful, a temporary measure to bridge the gap while we sought counseling and worked on understanding our true desires. Yet, every word she uttered only magnified the surreal nature of the proposition. I felt as if I were standing at a crossroads, one path leading deeper into an unknown realm of unconventional relationships, and the other beckoning me back to the painful reality of our disintegrating intimacy. In that charged moment, I realized that this proposal was not merely about physical satisfaction, it was an invitation to confront the core of our marital dissonance. I was forced to question not only my own desires but also the long-held beliefs about fidelity, intimacy, and the sanctity of marriage. The idea both intrigued and terrified me, a Pandora's box of emotional complexity that promised no easy answers. As the silence stretched on, I could feel the weight of a decision that would shape the future of our lives. With my heart pounding and my mind racing, I knew that the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and I braced myself for the long, difficult journey of redefining our relationship. In the days that followed, our once peaceful home transformed into a battleground of raw emotions and difficult negotiations. Every corner of our living space became a stage for tense discussions and quiet moments of internal torment. I found myself wrestling with a proposal that challenged everything I had believed our marriage stood for. On one hand, the idea of involving Lisa acknowledged my unmet physical needs, a need that had grown more acute with every passing day. On the other, it was a painful reminder that Emma's disinterest wasn't just a temporary setback, it was an intrinsic part of who she was. Our evenings turned into long, agonizing sessions of conversation, where the air was thick with both hope and despair. We sat across from each other at our worn dining table, its surface now marked with the weight of unspoken questions and tentative agreements. Emma's eyes, usually soft and inviting, now carried a fierce determination, mingled with a deep-seated sorrow. "I love you," she would say repeatedly, her voice trembling as she explained that she could never offer the passion I craved. "But maybe, if Lisa is willing to step in, we can both find fulfillment." Her words, meant to be a lifeline, instead deepened the fissures of our relationship. Each conversation left me feeling more conflicted. I wanted desperately to reclaim the intimacy I had longed for, yet the idea of sharing that space with someone else, especially someone so close to Emma, felt like an even deeper betrayal. I questioned whether this unconventional arrangement was a genuine solution or just another form of compromise that would ultimately undermine everything we had built together. In the quiet aftermath of our talks, I would pace the dimly lit halls of our home, my mind a tumult of emotions. I replayed every word, every pause, trying to discern if there was a hidden truth or simply an echo of our mutual pain. During one particularly harrowing night, as rain tapped softly against the window, I sat alone in the living room with my thoughts swirling like storm clouds. I remembered the early days of our marriage, when every touch and whispered promise had felt sacred. Now, those memories clashed violently with the reality of our negotiations. I felt torn between the undeniable fact that my physical needs had been ignored and the haunting realization that Emma's asexuality was not something she could change. The proposal had forced me to confront the painful reality that our union was built on compromises I had never imagined I'd have to make. Emma tried to reassure me, outlining tentative boundaries and expectations for how Lisa's involvement might work. We discussed what was acceptable and what might cross lines we weren't prepared to blur. Yet, with every logistical detail we hashed out, I felt the emotional cost mounting. I wondered if I was sacrificing too much of myself in the name of preserving our marriage. Was I willing to accept a future where love and physical passion were segregated, where my deepest desires were met by someone who was essentially an outsider to our shared history? In those late-night negotiations, I grappled with feelings of guilt, anger, and longing. I resented that our relationship had come to this, a makeshift solution born out of desperation rather than genuine desire. And yet, a small part of me clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this arrangement could serve as a bridge to something new, a redefined version of intimacy that we could both accept. The internal turmoil was overwhelming. Each conversation left me questioning if the path we were treading was a step toward healing or merely an admission of defeat. As the days passed, I continued to navigate this labyrinth of conflicting emotions, uncertain if the unconventional proposal was a remedy for our marital discord or a harbinger of further betrayal. Every word exchanged, every silent tear, deepened my internal struggle, leaving me torn between the need for physical connection and the profound pain of our evolving reality. The day I decided to confront Lisa arrived with a heavy mixture of dread and reluctant determination. Emotions still ran high, and every step toward the cafe felt like wading deeper into unknown territory. I recalled Emma's confident offer, a proposal that had once left me both conflicted and desperate, and now, with my heart pounding in my chest, I reached out to Lisa, the friend who had been thrust into our marital turmoil. Our first meeting was charged with an awkward, unspoken tension that made the air feel almost too thick to breathe. I found Lisa already seated at a small table in a quiet corner of the cafe, a soft smile on her face that belied the seriousness of the moment. She looked warm and approachable, yet her eyes carried a hint of sadness and uncertainty. As I sat down, the initial silence between us was punctuated only by the gentle clink of porcelain cups and the subdued murmur of other patrons. We exchanged tentative greetings, each of us aware that this meeting was unlike any other social encounter. After a few moments of small talk, Lisa spoke candidly about the situation. "I have to admit," she began slowly, "when Emma first mentioned the idea, I felt both flattered and incredibly unsure. It's not something I ever expected to be part of my life." Her honesty cut through the tension, and I found myself nodding in understanding. We talked about how this arrangement defied all conventional expectations, a marriage already marred by its own fractures, now being asked to accommodate a third presence. Lisa revealed that while she appreciated the trust Emma had placed in her, she was also deeply aware of the emotional risks involved. Over coffee, we discussed everything from our personal boundaries to the looming fear of causing further hurt to Emma. Lisa expressed that she was keenly aware of the delicate balance at stake. "I want to help, truly, but I don't want to become a wedge that drives a deeper divide in your relationship," she said, her voice tinged with genuine concern. Her words resonated with me deeply, stirring a cocktail of hope and apprehension. I shared my inner turmoil, how I longed for the physical connection that had been missing from my marriage, yet how the thought of adding another person to an already fragile bond filled me with dread. As we delved deeper, our conversation became raw and unfiltered. We spoke frankly about our fears, of losing ourselves, of deepening the emotional scars already inflicted by hidden truths, and of complicating an already complex marriage even further. I admitted that while the possibility of experiencing physical intimacy with someone who understood the situation offered a glimmer of fulfillment, it also threatened to undermine the sanctity of the commitments Emma and I had once made. Lisa, with her thoughtful gaze and careful choice of words, echoed my concerns. She explained that the potential for sexual fulfillment was just one facet of a relationship, and that diving into such an arrangement might lead us down a path of unforeseen emotional entanglements. By the end of our meeting, I felt both a cautious sense of hope and a lingering dread. The prospect of involving Lisa in our lives, rather than being a straightforward solution, was a delicate balancing act fraught with risks that extended far beyond physical intimacy. I realized that what we were contemplating was not just about filling a void, it was about fundamentally altering the dynamics of a relationship already strained by hidden secrets and unmet desires. As I left the cafe, I carried with me a deeper understanding. Any step toward this unconventional arrangement would require not only clear boundaries and honest communication, but also the willingness to navigate an emotional labyrinth where every decision carried profound consequences. Now, several months later, I sit alone in the quiet of my study, reflecting on the whirlwind of events that have upended my life. The room is dimly lit by the soft glow of a solitary lamp, and the familiar hum of the city outside barely intrudes on my solitude. I run my fingers along the smooth surface of my desk, a relic from happier times, and I can't help but feel the weight of every decision, every painful moment that has led me here. The journey from blissful ignorance to this stark, painful reality has left deep scars, scars that I know may never fully heal. I remember the days when I believed our marriage was the epitome of harmony, when every morning felt like a promise of endless love. Now, I am confronted with the truth of Emma's hidden asexuality and the radical proposition to involve Lisa in our lives, truths that shattered the foundation of my world. The realization that the intimacy I longed for was built on a facade has left me questioning everything about love and connection. I have spent countless hours in therapy, where I learned to untangle the mess of emotions that now defines me. My therapist's gentle, probing questions forced me to confront not only my unmet physical needs but also the deeper wounds of betrayal and self-doubt. Through these sessions, I have come to understand that healing is not a swift process but a slow, painstaking journey. I've learned to sit with my pain, to allow myself to feel the anguish of lost intimacy, and yet, to also see the potential for renewal in the midst of despair. Long, soul-searching conversations with trusted friends have also been a source of solace. Their honest perspectives, sometimes harsh and sometimes tender, have helped me see that my journey is not one of failure but of transformation. They remind me that even as I grieve the loss of a relationship built on hidden truths, I have the opportunity to redefine what intimacy and partnership mean to me. In those late-night talks, as we sat in quiet corners of familiar cafes, I began to piece together a vision of a future that, while uncertain, held the promise of genuine happiness rooted in truth. Every day, I faced the challenge of reconciling the man I thought I was with the person I must now become. I revisit old memories, reinterpreting every shared laugh, every touch, and every whispered word through the lens of my newfound knowledge. I have come to see that the physical connection I once prized may never fully exist in the way I imagined, but that does not diminish the possibility of a deep, meaningful bond. Instead, I am slowly learning that intimacy can take many forms, emotional, intellectual, even spiritual, and that true connection transcends the mere physical. The road ahead is still uncertain, fraught with questions and potential heartache, yet I feel a cautious determination taking root. With each passing day, I strive to redefine my identity and my expectations, to embrace the truth of my situation without letting it destroy me. I have come to understand that while the scars of betrayal may never fully disappear, they are also a testament to the strength it takes to confront painful realities and move forward. As I sit here in the quiet of my study, I remind myself that this is only one chapter in my life, a chapter of loss, yes, but also one of self-discovery and growth. My journey is far from over, and though the path may be winding and uncertain, I am determined to walk it one cautious step at a time, guided by the hard-won truth that even in the aftermath of betrayal, hope and genuine happiness can still be found.